Welcome to Dragons, Gazelles, and Unicorns. I'm Rosemary Truman, founder and CEO of the Center for Advanced Innovation, and this podcast is going to be very special. For the 8th Annual Pediatric Device Innovation Symposium, we're going to have a feature, software as a medical device. I'm absolutely thrilled to have Daniel Kraft on the podcast. Daniel is an internal medicine and pediatric doctor, having been trained at Stanford and Harvard. Daniel chairs the XPrize Pandemic Alliance Task Force, and he also chairs medicine for Singularity University. Daniel is also the founder and chair of Exponential Medicine. And a little known fact, Daniel served in the National Guard as an officer and flight surgeon. Thank you so much for being on today, Daniel. This is going to be very valuable for our listeners.
Great to be with you, Rosemary. Hello, everybody.
So could you just give us a little bit of an overview of your journey?
My journey? Well, I started out as a single cell, and I have to remember to plug in my battery, or we will not have a continued journey. Grew up in the Washington, D.C. area, not far from you. Got my start as a high school student, actually, in science at the National Institutes of Health, where I could bike, and started as a summer intern. And long story short, had to do a science fair project, and my science fair project in an immunology lab down the hall from Tony Fauci, who was there at the time, involved a new way to block the immune response, which later turned into a drug called Xolair from Genentech. Even though I didn't have any IP in it, it was exactly the same idea. Went off to Brown University for undergrad, where I majored in extracurriculars, including running the flying club and conducting the Stanford band, and went off to Stanford for medical school. Did some extra time there as a Howard Hughes research fellow in the lab of Irv Weissman, got more involved in immunology, stem cells, also did side projects in aviation, worked with NASA, went off to Mass General to do my internal medicine and pediatrics combined residency because I couldn't just pick one thing, and came back to Stanford where I did fellowships in pediatric hematology, oncology, and also adult bone marrow transplant. And in the mix of that, got involved in digital health and medical devices and the future of health and medicine through this convergence of fields. Partly as I joined as a founding faculty in 2008 of Singularity University, where the theme is understanding exponential technologies. So I've been the chair of medicine there since it started, and since then founded a program you mentioned called Exponential Medicine. And the whole idea is getting out of our silos and thinking differently about health, medicine, biotech, and to help reshape that, leveraging a lot of the new technologies that are in our pockets and becoming faster, cheaper, and more available. So that's a quick summary. And part of what I do from helping existing companies and startups is help start companies, help fund them, and still hopefully wear my clinical hat at times, and very interested in the interface of pediatric technology and innovation, so we can bring many of these new fields, whether it's software as a medical device or next-gen 3D printed medical devices or software to the youngest patients to help them live long, healthy, happy lives.
So can you explain more about these exponential technologies?
Well, I think most of us are familiar with linear thinking. We can all count to 10. But when you think exponentially, it's 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, etc. I never was that good at math, but if you take 15 exponential steps, you're at 32,000. But if you take 30 exponential steps, that 30th step will be over 1 billion. And if that was a meter of step, that would be 26 times around the planet. And that's a bit of the sometimes surprising power of exponentials. My usual favorite demo is somewhere I have my antique iPhone 2, which still works. Here it is. It's an antique now. But it's 12 years old, and 12 years ago, this was amazing. It's more powerful than the crazy supercomputer from the 1990s. Now it feels slow and clunky and has a low resolution camera. Still works. My iPhone 11, right? Pretty amazing. Many times better. We'll soon see antique. Maybe it will dissolve into my next generation iPhone or Apple VR AR headset glasses, which are coming to market soon. And these, of course, are riding an exponential wave. Moore's law, the power of computing, gets sometimes twice as fast and half the price about every 18 to 24 months. And that's happening not just in digital and chips, but happening in other fields from AI and blockchain and augmented and virtual reality. Fields that are moving very, very quickly. And particularly in the setting of healthcare, how do we connect the dots between what's happening in a sensor that can fit on your wrist, or a smart patch, or AI, or big data, or synthetic biology, so that we can really get out of our old mindsets and reshape health and medicine in much smarter, more personalized, proactive ways.
So can you give us an example of an exponential technology in the pediatric medical device arena?
Well, again, I think thematically, and this is what we talk a lot about at my Exponential Medicine conference, it's not about any one quote-unquote exponential or fast-moving technology, but how you sort of mash them up in interesting ways. And so I'll take you one example. We're all familiar with the Internet of Things, that's starting to move faster and faster. We're now at 5G, which is 100 times faster than 4G. MIT and Singapore folks are working on 6G. That enables us to have this Internet of Things, and now the Internet of Medical Things. And now with lots of technologies like low-cost sensors, better batteries, you can put a little sensor on your wrist, like an Apple Watch or a Fitbit or a Whoop, or put it in a little patch. This is a little, I call it an underwearable. You get a pack of 10 of these, you put them in 10 pairs of underwear, and now these aren't just health devices. They started out to help mindfulness and meditation, but now they can be used to track respiratory rate, heart rate, steps, in a child or an adult who's got a respiratory issue. It could be cystic fibrosis, it could be pneumonia, it could be COVID, it could be COPD. And so we can start to use these connected Internet of Medical Thing devices to do remote patient monitoring. And many kids who have chronic diseases or adults, they bounce back to the hospital after they've gotten super sick. We can use these new connected tools to do a better job of measuring outside of the four walls of the clinic or hospital. So that's one example of a convergence of many technologies, often summarized as the world of quantified self, where you can have a sensor in your ring or watch or patch. It's moving to quantified health, where that data can start to flow back to your pediatrician, to your nutritionist, to your healthcare system, to make more sense of that in real time to improve care.
So how do you bring in all the omics data?
We are in the age of omics. You can think of your favorite some of the first sequencings were done. It took like 10 years and $4 billion. Now we're literally at a point where the cost of sequencing a whole genome has dropped to twice the rate of Moore's law, to arguably well under $500. It will soon be $100. Many children are sequenced even before birth from circulating mother's DNA. So here's your classic genome. And I apologize, the neighborhood lawn blowers going off its tour. AI is easy, AV is hard, particularly in the age of this. I'm going to move somewhere quieter. I'm not going to be able to do that. Hold on one second. Bad timing. Hopefully I'll just speak over the noise.
That's all right.
What I was going to say is genomic is one element. That gives you a lot of base information about someone's potential risk for disease, or you can pre-diagnose a kid with cystic fibrosis and be much more proactive. Then you have your microbiome, the bugs in our gut that play a role in risk for inflammatory bowel disease or even neurologic issues. And if we can understand the microbiome, including in children, we're learning it plays a major role in health and disease. In fact, if a baby is born by C-section versus normal vaginal way, they miss getting the vaginome if they're born by C-section and have higher risks of obesity and other challenges. So we're even seeing the advent of doing a vaginome transfer to babies right after C-section to give them more of that normal gut population or skin population. Then there's the metabolome, that can be measured in folks with metabolic diseases from diabetes and beyond, and the sociome and all the other elements. And the challenge for patients, clinicians, healthcare systems is to how do we put all that data together in useful ways so they can really impact the future of care.
So if you know that genetically you're prone to a particular disease area, how can some of the, for example, the sociome change the outcome, or your microbiome change the outcome?
Well, knowledge and data is interesting, but it's only useful if it translates to action. So now in our exponential age, whether it's from our wearables, our underwearables, our Fitbits, our genetics, our electronic medical records, all this information is becoming massive, but often very siloed. It doesn't interconnect. The challenge is to go from that information, whether it's from your genome or others, to actionable information, and then to use that to drive change or prescribing or preventing. And so the hope of leveraging all our omics and beyond, particularly in the pediatric realm, is to use that early in a child's life when we know they might have a higher risk of cancer or even dementia in late life, or atrial fibrillation, or pick your disease, many of which are influenced by our genes, not the major factor for most. That means you might do screening differently. You might optimize the diet and the nutritional path. You may work on doing a whole new sort of personalized health journey of that child into young adulthood, into middle age and late age, that will really move the needle in terms of outcomes and longer, healthier lives, health span, not just lifespan.
Could you tell us what you think is going to be the future of innovation in the in children's health?
Well, there's no one future innovation in children's health. I think the point is to connect the dots between a lot of these new technologies to even create entire new fields, many of which can impact pediatric health. So at the interface of traditional drugs and devices, and all these other technologies, from Internet of Things to omics to big data, we're creating entire new fields: digiceuticals, AI-driven drug discovery, 3D printed medical devices, virtualized care, and chatbots. Many of these things didn't exist 10 or 20 years ago. If they existed, they cost millions of dollars and only lived in academic labs or in large companies. So now you can democratize a lot of these tools, and particularly for children, we can use them to have a lens on early prediction and prevention, or to do much more personalized therapy, whether it's gene therapy, as used in my field of in some parts of hematology and oncology, to cure some diseases. We're in the cusp now of curing sickle cell with CRISPR-based or gene modification therapies. Take out the bone marrow stem cells, modify them, put them back. Or in some cases, we'll see genetic engineering that you inject the agent into the body, the genes are swapped out in the liver, so a child will never have super high familial hypercholesteremia and early death from cardiovascular disease. There's all the new sort of forms of digital and mobile and connected health. So a lot of pediatric care can be done with a virtual checkup, whether that's looking in your kid's ear with a little mobile device, or having a little medical tricorder type device to integrate vital signs, temperature, blood pressure, oxygen saturation, that a child or a parent can use to manage a common viral infection, or manage a much more complex chronic disease. So lots of things are coming together. The trick is to translate them into clinical care, to align the incentives, which are often misaligned. Pediatricians not usually paid in doing a virtual ear exam. We're seeing some changes in virtual care as accelerated by COVID, so that now we can do it on Zoom without being HIPAA non-compliant. Some of these are being covered by Medicare and Medi-Cal. So lots of potential to reshape care. It is somewhat disruptive to the standard way things are done. So pediatricians and others are going to need to adapt. But I think big picture, we can end up with a much smarter, holistic healthcare platform, and start with our youngest patients.
So how do you shift the incentives? You mentioned that the incentives are a barrier to actually pursuing some of these integrated solutions for children in the future, innovation.
Yeah, well, we don't practice evidence-based medicine. We practice reimbursement-based medicine. That's a quote from my friend, Dr. Dean Ornish. So, the incentive for a pediatrician is to bring the patient in for their ear check, or for some little follow-up, or the incentive for the CEO of the hospital is to keep the beds full, or the CEO or the incentive for a surgeon is to operate. They don't get paid for not operating. So we need to think more smartly about what's incentivized, what's disincentivized. And hopefully with the shift to now in many systems, value-based care, we're going to start to reward and pay for prevention. For the pediatrician or the primary care doc to get a bonus when their panel of patients has less ER visits that are unnecessary, where the hemoglobin A1C has been managed in their diabetic patients, where blood pressures are under control, where we leverage digital tools and technologies to connect and have follow-up that really gives better outcomes for an acute or chronic condition, or is leveraged to pick up disease at stage 0 rather than stage 2 or stage 3. So we have to pay a lot of attention to incentives. Sometimes we can learn that incentives can be dangerous. You get what you incentivize.
Yeah, that's right.
15 years ago, we had the fifth vital sign was pain. So what were the incentives? It was for doctors in ERs and outpatient clinics to prescribe more pain pills because they were being measured on how well did you control that patient's pain, and often it was over-controlled, and you had 70 Vicodin for a wisdom tooth extraction or a small twist of an ankle, and that led to partly contributed to our opioid epidemic and beyond. So, or hospital systems getting changed how they get paid. They're not going to get reimbursed for a heart failure readmission in the first month, so that means they're often pushing back till day 31 for that patient to be readmitted. And it turns out, while the hospital may have saved money, there's higher mortality and morbidity in those patients. So we have to be very careful with incentives. But technology alone is a part of it. The incentives for payment models and aligning the incentives and the reinvention of regulatory as well. The FDA has a whole new pathway called Software as a Medical Device. They actually launched the new FDA Digital Health Center this month, September 2020, led by Bakul Patel. And a lot of the initiatives came from thinking exponentially. We had Bakul Patel come to Exponential Medicine, and we did several workshops. What's coming? How do you think forward-thinking about your regulatory path so that you can have an app connected to a device or connected to other platforms that is smart and informed and can be safe and effective in this fast-moving world.
So is the FDA path going to be different for software as a medical device?
It's a whole pathway. If you just Google software as a medical device, you can learn the latest. It's an evolving route. They're also doing called a pre-check platform. If a company has already been through several routes before, you can speed, like pre-check in airports when we used to travel in airports, get things through in faster, smarter ways when you've already been validated in other experiences. So there is a lot of work on the regulatory side. It's often been a slower process, but as technology accelerates, the regulatory process has to as well. If we're going to get, whether it's, for one example, just in summer of 2020, the first video game for the brain for children with ADHD was approved. A company called Achille Health. So a new class of therapy, video games, sort of software as a medical device for children who have ADHD, and that it's obviously safer and more effective in many kids than taking Ritalin. So that's disruptive to our friends in the pharma world. How are we going to get pediatricians to start prescribing a video game for ADHD? How do we use our new digital tools to better diagnose ADHD and not just have a kid who might be a bit fidgety or not overdiagnose? How do we leverage our new tools to not just say that a patient has type 2 diabetes, but understand that at the genomic level and better work with diet and medication and lifestyle? It's not one size fits all. Lots of new challenges and opportunities as we connect the dots.
So you also talk about personalized pills. Could you go into a little bit of that?
Well, one thing I recognize is that, in pediatrician, particularly in pediatric oncology, we're always dosing patients very much based on their weight. Even Tylenol, you'll dose it, 4 milligrams per kilogram, etc., until the kid's, 16 or 18, and then every adult gets the same 500 milligrams of acetaminophen. Many other drugs need to be dosed very carefully, like Coumadin, a blood thinner. And then in the adult side, you still give adults not liquid forms, but pills that you have to cut in half or thirds. So that got me thinking about how do we better take the lessons of pediatrics, blend that with adult medicine, and even for kids or adults, make it easier to take a single pill. So I'm trying to find my little version of it here. So I've invented a technology called Internal Medicine, the idea of 3D printing personalized medications so that a child or an adult can take a combination pill with, let's say, a patient with hypertension and heart disease. It has their aspirin, their statin, their beta blocker, their ACE inhibitor, their vitamin D, all integrated into one pill, and the dose that matches them, and that could eventually even be printed at home or be printed into a patch or into a gummy bear or into your breakfast coffee cartridge. So the idea that we can better personalize the drugs, their doses, their combinations, and the ways to deliver them so that people take them. Half of medications aren't taken as prescribed. So a long way to go in terms of improving adherence, but also personalization, and then using our new digital forms of data, whether that's your digital exhaust from your vitals or your lab on a chip at home to optimally print the next medication. And here's a little example of sort of a, hard to see, 3D printed pill. The idea of multiple medications in one. It's not really 3D printing, but sorting marbles in a sense. So, and that could be applied for almost any patient population.
So just going back to the software as a medical device, and you're kind of, all of these different things are kind of integrating the personalized pill, the software as a medical device, maybe the virtual patient as well. What do you think is what is an area that we haven't explored yet that we need to exploit?
Well, again, there's that famous quote from Mark Andreessen: "Software's eating the world," and software's starting to eat healthcare because we need sort of software, big data, machine learning, AI to make sense of all the new data that's spinning off our bodies or being collected in our environments. There's all sorts of needs to make sense of this. Our brains can't quantify and optimize. What statin do I pick for a patient? It can be integrating with pharmacogenomics and other data. So we need to layer the software element in what's often called decision support. Our electronic medical records today are horrible. They're an epic fail, pun intended, because they're basically not even up-leveling most clinicians. It wouldn't be interesting when you're seeing a kid in the clinic that you could have their genomic and other information in there. You, from their connected home, understand what their physiology and behaviors have been in a privacy-centric way, and use that in your virtual visit or in your in-person visit to inform what might be really best for that individual patient, not one-size-fits-all therapies that we tend to go to the mean. How do we integrate that into, again, workflow? One challenge amongst all these elements, software as a medical device, wearables, apps, omics, is most clinicians don't want more data, they want the actionable insights. And right now, a lot of that data is siloed. It comes as data, not useful integration. I don't want to see, if I'm trying to understand someone's sleep, I don't want all their EEG or elements. I want a sleep score that's synthesized. Or if I've got a patient with hypertension and they have a connected blood pressure cuff, I want to see not just individual data, but the trend lines. And what does that mean? And what's the actionable element that I might utilize for prevention, diagnostics, or therapy? So big challenge is to take the technology and the data, turn that information, and integrate that into the clinical care pathways so that it can really be utilized. And of course, paid for, and hopefully show it's safe and effective so that the best versions of this can iterate and improve.
So what needs to be done to make the data actionable? Is it AI, machine learning?
And a lot of it is around sometimes user-centered design. If you're showing lots of raw data, that's not helpful. How do you design that information to come back to the patient themselves? The new drug is the empowered, engaged patient, patients included. They can move from the era of quantified self, where the data is stuck on your smartwatch or your app, to quantified health, where that flows to your healthcare provider. But how do you provide that in a meaningful way so that the patient just doesn't see the number of steps, but that puts that in context? Or even my Fitbit today, or my Whoop device, puts pretty complex exercise and heart rate data into an actionable form. How are you doing today? Your recovery is 60% of normal, or your sleep score was only 60. Maybe you should get to bed earlier tonight. How, for the clinician, do you not have that on some horrible dashboard, but in ways that comes up in a smart form? When they're logging into their system in the morning, they see the 5 patients of their 2,000 that they need to call because there's something off in their physiology or they have a personal check engine light that comes on, and that the patient sees that, and the clinician can act on that early based on the synthesis of multiple forms of data. So the check engine light in the car is a great example of taking data from 400 or more sensors and making that, with machine learning and AI, more actionable. And the check engine light in a Tesla is very different than in an old VW Bug. So each of us needs it programmed a bit differently to be presented in the right way. And then hopefully, so we use that proactively to take our car to the mechanic early before we blow a gasket. How do you use that in the clinical sense for the patient or the caregiver or the parent or the physician, and how do you get the payer and pharma and everybody else integrated into that as well is a huge opportunity.
So we've had this pandemic. How do you think it's driven innovation in children's health?
Well, in children's health, in health in general, COVID,
in health in general.
horrible as it's been, is and will continue to be a huge catalyst for change, particularly in the range of digital, connected, virtualized care. I mean, I think the incidence of virtual visits went up 1,000% in the spring of 2020. It's come back down a bit, but the genie's out of the bottle. We've seen how easy it is to do virtual visits. A lot of them, unfortunately, are still basically like a Zoom. You're talking to your doc or your nurse practitioner or pharmacist. It's not usually leveraging in data. I mean, the future of virtual visit won't be, you're not going to see your doctor on the screen until you've done your chatbot visit, where it's going to ask you to review systems. It might synthesize data from your wearables or your environment or your genome. And then when you do meet the level of need, you'll then up level to see a doctor, hopefully your doctor, because a lot of virtual visits today are on platforms where it's the doc in the box for your urgent care question, but it'll be your pediatrician or your specialist who's increasingly going to see you, and they'll see you in context, and they'll have tools and software to help optimize that visit and to track you partly continuously or asynchronously so that care can be managed. A good example, let's say in pediatrics, might be kids with congenital heart disease, and they have complex surgeries. Often when they're very young, you've got young parents who are overwhelmed as it is. And some early examples in partnership with Apple, I think a group out of University of Virginia built a very smart iPad platform where the patients would go home often earlier than they would normally, because you could then smartly monitor that baby at home, where they'll do a better job in the NICU or PICU, and the parents would have software that would give them alerts to when data looked wrong. It could easily connect them to their nurse care team. It could kind of provide that holistic, virtualized care in an appified form that could make a big in both the mental health and cost level and survivability of these complex pediatric and other patients. So that's one example that's not COVID related, but now I think COVID has accelerated virtual care. It's accelerated new forms of vaccination, as we've seen, and diagnostics. I'm chairing the XPrize Pandemic Alliance Task Force together with Jeff Huber, the founder of Grail and Open COVID Screen. We designed and launched very quickly an XPrize for rapid COVID testing to reward and identify teams and companies that could create a COVID test that was fast. You get the results back in minutes or an hour at most. Frequent, where you could test every other day, like you might need in school settings and work settings. Easy, so it wouldn't be a probe to the back of your nose. You could be done with spit, or maybe just a smidge of your nose or breath. And easy, it could be done by anybody. You didn't need a lab technician or a pharmacist or a physician to administer the test. And we had 707 teams from 70 countries enter the competition. You can learn more at xprize.org/testing. We're now narrowing that down to 200 teams. We're going to test them, and the finalists will narrow down to 20 companies, and the final 5 will help scale into different environments, from schools and workplaces to football stadiums. And so that's an example of something that's catalyzed. And those testing platforms, which will hopefully leverage our smartphones and AI and beyond, will hopefully provide a testing platform for the common flu or other infections. So you'll have in everyone's home and pocket a fast, cheap, and easy way of diagnosing viruses and other infections in real time, and bring us to an era of precision public health. We've seen a lot of failings in public health here in the United States, especially around testing. That's one catalysis. Another area would be we don't just have a pandemic, we have an infodemic. We've already seen the challenges in pediatrics with the anti-vaxxers, and we now have seen the resurgence of preventable diseases like measles, sadly, and maybe things like polio and other things might come back if we're not vaccinating our kids, and there was a big drop in vaccinations since the setting of COVID. Now we're hopefully going to have a COVID vaccine by early 2021 or so. What's going to happen with the anti-vax movement there? There's lots of misinformation out there. We need to educate parents, mothers, kids, educate kids while they're young about the importance of taking care of their own health. So lots of opportunities that have been catalyzed in vaccines and therapy and in collaborations amongst healthcare folks and technologists and others around the world to bring solutions that address this pandemic and hopefully will help prevent or the next one will happen in a much kinder, gentler way.
So have you seen a lot more collaboration during COVID this time?
We've been seeing an immense amount of collaboration. The Pandemic Alliance has 80 or more different companies and NGOs and others in the mix. We've seen a lot of international collaborations, sharing of data sets. Folks who used to compete are collaborating. I think we're going to see the lessons from the intensive care units in Wuhan, China in January help the intensive care units in Italy, and then those in New York City, and now we're helping inform better acute care for COVID across America. And we've gone from, I think, 60% mortality of ICU patients to 40% or less. So there's been rapid learning and rapid sharing. Mm-hmm. So that hopefully, again, is a silver lining to the pandemic that's going to inform many elements of healthcare going forward. There's usually that 17-year gap that's often quoted between something being discovered and becoming standard of care. COVID has accelerated that to weeks or months. We still have challenges with misinformation. We had the whole disaster led by some of our politicians in terms of things like hydroxychloroquine and others. And so we need to be understanding the public health implications of misinformation and disinformation, even coming from some of our quote-unquote leadership.
Mm-hmm. Could you go into a little bit more detail on precision public health for the listeners? Well,
public health is super important and something that's been underfunded. If you want to think about precision public health, some of the first signs of the COVID-19 element were picked up by software, a company called, I think, Blue Dot out of Canada, sifting through everything from news elements and other forms of data to identify early hotspots. So you can imagine the future of public health will be finding a new virus and its impact super early and snuffing it out, kind of like finding the fire before it spreads. Mm-hmm. Drone technology to identify all sorts of new ways of identifying and then doing very much smarter and effective contact tracing, identifying, test, trace, and isolate, which is now accelerating onto our mobile phones. It's old-fashioned contact tracing is now being embedded with Apple and Google software into all of our phones if you want it. And yes, there are privacy concerns, but I would argue the overall public good is enhanced by being able to do, if you want to call it precision public health, so that we're catching things early and can respond in hyper-local ways. And then potentially if you do have an outbreak, an epidemic, and not a pandemic, you can know where you can go to get tested. What public health measures do you and your family need to take immediately? What if that popped up on your phone? It knew who you were, where you were. I've been hopefully start and hopefully build a new app for the WHO, which we'll hope could be like a Waze for COVID. And eventually we have smart, trusted platforms that can provide you proactive information, but also where to respond, where to get tested, where to get vaccinated. And I think the future of this might even integrate crowdsourcing, where just like we have volunteer EMTs and firefighters, you might be a volunteer public health person. In your neighborhood, you might be trained up on an online course. There are available contact tracing courses out of Johns Hopkins. We can have a whole army of a global public health corps that can respond to health emergencies, help understand social disparities. A big element around COVID has been highlighting the big gaps in care and the social disparities and why certain populations are getting COVID and dying from it at much higher rates than others. So we can do a lot with public health. Our extended lifespans in 1900, I think the average lifespan was in the 40s or 50s, and now we're obviously in the 70s and 80s. A lot of that's from public health, vaccines, clean water, access to community health. A lot of that's not fancy technology. And I think if we use our new, smarter, connected digital age, we can enhance public health to prevent the next pandemic and to enhance health and medicine around the planet.
So can you just, shifting gears for a second, can you talk about some of your future innovation initiatives?
Future initiatives, I mean, one platform I founded is called Exponential Medicine. If you go to exponentialmedicine.com/videos, you can watch a lot of great talks with thought leaders sort of highlighting what's here and what's coming. I think a lot of folks, there's a famous quote, the future's already here, just not evenly distributed, and we need to better distribute the innovations and things that are working now and learn from different countries and health systems where they're already ahead of the curve. Because there's so much happening in digital and mobile and connected health, some of that's catalyzed by COVID, it's a challenge for patients and clinicians to know what's available. It might be an app to help you quit smoking or manage your blood pressure or diabetes, or it might be a wearable device that can track your blood sugar or other physiologies. There's a lot out there, and more is coming. So we need a bit of a digital health formulary. So I've been building a new platform, still very early, but you can go to the website digital.health, which is trying to integrate a smart database and other tools and resources so you can learn about what's out there for different conditions. We have a whole section on pediatrics and pediatric innovations, whether it's remote patient monitoring or pediatric innovation platforms and medical device solutions, so that we can have a one-stop place to find and match the digital or other sort of tool that might, or platform or solution that might match your patients or your health system. Other initiatives, I advise several companies. One interesting one, we talked about crowdsourcing a little bit, is literally building a Waze for healthcare. And it's founded by a founding team member at Waze, so that if you have a chronic condition, inflammatory bowel disease, migraines, psoriatic arthritis, lupus, or cancer, or COVID, you can share what's happening to you, what's worked, what's not worked, with thousands of patients like you who have the same condition, and we'll see what's going to work. And using machine learning and AI, provide a feedback loop, just like Waze does on your driving, of patients on similar paths and journeys like you, to hopefully glean crowdsourced recommendations that can inform healthcare in general. So that's another initiative, and there are many others. It's an exciting time to innovate.
Yeah. So for the listeners, make sure you go to digital.health and Exponential Medicine. Check those out. So what is the, by the way, if people are interested in what's going to happen with the XPrize, what's the timeline for the next decision point?
So the rapid COVID testing XPrize, we designed and launched in the fastest time ever, like less than a month and a half or two, raised $10 million, it's $5 million in prizes, and with a lot of other support of the teams that get to the final stages and the teams in general. And what often happens in XPrize, you're trying to incentivize something that's audacious but achievable to happen faster, to address a need, and certainly there's a need for faster, cheaper, and easier tests in schools and beyond. So we have, after 700 entries, we're narrowing that down to the final 200. They're going to get test kits that they're blinded, and we'll see how well they do. And then the top 20 of those will be selected with a combination of judging and their data to come into our evaluation labs, and we'll see how they work in real clinical settings. And then the top 5 will go into pilot sites as we accelerate those to the market and help, from many folks in the XPrize community, from to investors, to public health systems, to governments, to really get these solutions out there and to scale. Because we might need 50 million tests a day across the U.S. We're much below that in our current situation. Other prizes we've been involving are those challenges around mental health, big implications for mental health for both kids stuck at homeschool or Zoom and their parents, or any of us. So there's how do we understand the ramifications to mental health and better address that. We have an XPrize challenge on better N95 masks. This is for up to college level folks to compete in. That's a great way. How do you rethink the mask? Maybe that has a digital layer to it. How do you 3D print a mask? It's not the solution, but the problem and how to better address it. And also approaches on how do we best design new drugs using AI and machine learning, and then how, when we have vaccines, we best distribute them. So a lot's happening in the XPrize environment. If you go to xprize.org or COVID-19/xprize.org, you can see what the Alliance is up to, and many of you can join our Alliance 2.0 if you're looking to collaborate, connect dots, and accelerate solutions for this pandemic or others. Many like to say that, especially my friend Dr. Larry Brilliant, who helped eradicate smallpox, this is in effect a practice pandemic, as horrible as that might seem. In fact, there are other disease vectors that will be much more lethal, might spread even more easily, that if we do the right job now, we can hopefully prevent or better respond to it in the future.
So just wrapping up here, what wise advice do you have for entrepreneurs right now?
Well, I think we can all be sort of healthcare entrepreneurs, whether you're a physician, a patient, a nurse, a pharmacist, any of us now. We all see pain points and problems in healthcare. I mean, for God's sakes, it's 2020. We're still using fax machines. We're still filling out forms on clipboards. I got a cardiac study a few months ago. The only way I could get it to me was on a CD-ROM, and I don't even own a CD-ROM player anymore. There's so many barriers in care. We see them in the clinic all the time. So you can see a problem, and a problem is an opportunity. Saying, here's a pain point, here's an unmet need. How might I solve that differently? How might I find a solution that's already out there? How can I use a Fitbit to manage a patient with a neurologic disorder, to measure their tremor or their steps, and use that in my care? In my field of oncology, there's now examples of even just a simple wearable can see how a patient's doing on chemo and help then respond more actively and understand their likely course. So bottom line, if you see a pain point, and we all see them, think about how might you solve it, or find solutions that might already be out there. Or even if it's not fully FDA approved or paid for, maybe you've got patients with hypertension, go buy 10 connected blood pressure cuffs and lend them out to your patients. Especially some kids have hypertension, and it'd be better to have that digital feedback loop that you can start to try out as a clinician or as a patient or as a need knower yourself. So, and also start to play with all these quantified health technologies. Some of them are, not FDA cleared, but simple wearable that tracks your sleep or steps can give you insight into your own health, your own sleep or lack thereof, and help optimize that. And maybe start to share that data back with your clinician and help them make sense of it. There is the All of Us trial by the NIH, which I think is an important example where you can all volunteer to be a data donor. It's a Framingham trial on steroids for 1 million Americans, so we can start to learn from data across socioeconomic and racial groups as opposed to just the Framingham set of patients or volunteers. That's a good example of how you can get involved. And help be the instigator of cross-connecting dots in your healthcare system. Have a brown bag lunch where you have the healthcare IT folks meet with a cardiologist and a 3D printer person and someone who does big data and AI. We often have too many silos in healthcare, pediatrics, cardiology, oncology, pick your specialty. We're often very siloed in how we meet, not enough cross-collaboration. And there's a lot of opportunity to learn from each other and bring new solutions to impact our patients and our communities.
So my last question is, what's the first place you're going to visit when the pandemic is under control?
Oh, I don't need to go visit anywhere anymore. I can just I can take my VR headset and I can be anywhere, anytime. I'm looking forward to getting together with my family in real life. We had 2 sort of family reunions which were put on hold this summer, so it'd be good to do that in a safe way. But just for a moment, we didn't talk about this. Virtual reality is one area that does let you travel when you're stuck at home or sheltered in place. And VR has lots of applications, particularly for kids or for clinicians to do education. You can learn about your heart or learn about how to do a surgery and train to do that procedure, simulation. It can be used for therapy. A patient who's stuck in a bone marrow transplant unit or about to have a procedure can go into a virtual environment and visit the beach. It's being used for physical therapy to get folks engaged in physical therapy. You can use VR to help manage chronic and acute pain. Lots of things in VR. So it lets you travel and meet with people virtually. So long answer to your short question. I'm looking forward to getting out of California and back to the rest of the world. But
right.
There are lots of tools that have been up-leveled in the setting of COVID that enables us to travel and meet with people in new ways as well. And VR and AR and extended reality are going to be a big part of the future of healthcare. So that's another element you can start to try yourself.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for providing so many insights for the listeners today. I really appreciate your time.
Good to be with you. And I hope everybody out there stays safe, stays curious, stays innovative, and helps reimagine the future of healthcare from kids to adults, from your local community to around the planet. It's a really crisis is opportunity. It's a real ripe crisis right now to help catalyze better healthcare across the continuum.